Good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar. I'm Steve Yoland, I'm Business Development Manager here at Tier 2. Just a little bit of housekeeping to start with. If I can ask you to stay muted and have your cameras turned on, that would be appreciated, just save on bandwidth. We are recording this presentation, so we'll share the link in the follow-up after. So, agenda for this morning, brief introduction to Tier 2, Tier 2 and Auth0's partnership and why we've done this. Tobias will then be giving you an overview of Auth0 with some benefits and a live demo. And then Andy will be running through a case study which we worked on last year with a company called PredictImmune. We'll then wrap up and QA if we have time at the end. So some of you will already know us, but those that don't, Tier 2 are 19 years old. We're full stack Java developers. We're also Red Hat middleware and OpenShift experts, and we were appointed Red Hat's first middleware premier partner back in 2014. This was down to our skills and experience. So we don't take partners on lightly, and this is one of the reasons we've taken on Auth0. Our core business is software development. We have an agile approach that is custom to you, and we base all of our delivery on the Scrum methodology. We split our software development out into 3 stages. We work with the customer to discover what they want to do, requirements, architecture, and planning on the application. We then develop the software using sprints, which then runs through user acceptor testing, operational acceptance testing, and then into the deployment side of things. And then once we've done that, we then support and maintain the applications that we've developed with the customer. On the Red Hat side, we provide consultancy and services around the middleware stack, so EAP, Fuse, AMQ, etc. But we also provide services around OpenShift and Ansible within the application side. So why have we partnered with Auth0? Well, over the past 18 months or so, managing identities has become even more complex as companies use cloud services in their applications. So this new partnership with Auth0 allows us to offer best-in-class identity as a service to customers who do not have an existing solution, and those who do not wish to take on the cost and risk of developing one from scratch. So Auth0 was a logical choice for us, being the first identity management platform for application builders. Their seamless service design combined with our hands-on development experience, the two fit perfectly together with our service-based cloud-native approach to delivering custom solutions. So that's a little bit about Tier 2 and why we've partnered with Auth0. I'm now going to hand over to Tobias. He's going to go through an overview of Auth0 with a live demo. So Tobias, over to you.
Thank you very much. So let me just share my screen, and I hope you can see something now. So thank you also for the warm intro. Just to introduce myself, I'm Tobias. I'm the Partner Solutions Engineer here at Auth0 for the EMEA region. And as Annie just introduced, we are really in the game of application and developer-centric identity access management. So partnering with Tier 2 was a natural choice for us because they bring huge development expertise, and they are exactly those people, those developers who can utilize Auth0 best to create real value through identity on top of just being a checkbox of people can now securely log in. And just to give you a rough idea of what we mean when we say value through identity, very abstractly speaking, identity management is about how can a user or a system user, so a machine, for example, access my application. How can they log in, and how can I know who wants to access which information in my app? But around this identity process is way more than just how can a user store their username and password. So the very obvious question we have is, who is the user? And that doesn't stop with what is the user's email address, but that goes beyond that, saying, who is that user as a person? What's their name? What's the language they speak? What is the license they acquired from us? And lots of more information that is relevant around that user persona, not only in the B2C sector. So if we think about user personas, at least I naturally think about Amazon and Facebook and LinkedIn, who make money with knowing about the user. But any service out there today needs a rich user profile so they can actually learn about the user and offer them better services. And that leads us to the second question. Once we know who that user is initially, what could we know about the user and what should we know? And all of this information usually ends up in the identity system as well, because when they sign up, that's their first interaction. So that's your first chance to give them a great experience by knowing them. But also when we think later on to the application and to what is the user allowed to do, we need all of this information in our identity provider. Because only by knowing my user is a enterprise plan subscriber of mine, or my user is labeled an admin in his company, we know that user can access these specific portions of my application. So that's also information our IDP needs to manage for us. And lastly, how can our app work with that user? So how can our app take all of this information and do simple things like providing a profile page, up to automating users' tools. So if you ever work with G Suite, for example, they are very heavy on plugins and third-party developed apps. This also needs an identity provider. Having Outlook manage your emails and calendar, which are not coming from Microsoft directly. These are all challenges that a IDP is necessary for managing, because the IDP is the one entity that knows who's your user, who's your app, and who's allowed to do what in that app. And shifting it back to the user, it's not only about you should have that because it makes your developer's life easier. It's actually tangible money and return on investment that you see if you focus about the user's journey. So this is a study from PwC around user experience. And you probably can all read through those stats yourself, but just to highlight a few more. In identity, we're in this business of gathering personal data about the user to make their lives easier, to offer them greater services, to offer them personalized services. And 63% of customers who were surveyed in this study claimed that they will be willing to share more personal data with a company that offers a great customer experience. And while great, of course, is now not strictly defined, it generally means a user experience that your users understand and like. So it's intuitive to use your app. It's intuitive to understand why your app is behaving in a certain way. And most, or at least many of these interactions that are user experience or customer experience relevant happen in your identity system. If a user logs in and they get weirdly redirected to 10 different pages where they have to give consent, where they have to do multi-factor authentication, and they don't really know what's going on, that's a very bad experience. And your users will probably abandon your solution before they even started using it. This is especially true in B2C, while we see actually 1 in 3 users abandoning a solution after just one negative experience. But I'll also show an example in a enterprise B2B scenario where it's very important to have this great experience from a security perspective. And then, of course, we all know that there is still room for improvement in your user experience, but also on the more positive side, we can observe a 16% price premium on great user experience. And what that really means in the end is customers are willing to spend more on your solution when you offer them a great experience with your app. And again, if your customers churn after logging in because they are repelled by what they see there, you won't even get to convince them with your otherwise great experience that may then will give you that price premium, that revenue premium. So to think about identity, what is it that makes a experience at least good? What is it that users expect? Many of our customers built their identity solution themselves, and they started out with the reasoning of, it's just a login box. It's just a email and a password, and I have to be able to click a login or a sign up button. And that's it. And how hard can it be? This is the baseline. But when we think about it, what happens if you need to give support to your customers? So, for example, implementing a password reset. If you don't have this, you will spend a lot of time answering customers' emails about how they can gain access to their account again that you could have spent on innovating. And also, you will lose a lot of customers because especially with the B2C application, it's not necessary in my life. I'm willing to walk away from my app because I don't have an easy way to recover my account. And in fact, I think we did our own surveys, and it was around about 50 to 60% of users surveyed claimed that they forget at least one password each year. So it's not that unlikely that your users will forget your passwords. Then we think about how can we make it easier for the users to sign in. Again, surveys we did for our customers showed that social logins can increase user sign up by 20 to 30%. How can you bring that in? That is something you have to develop for each and every provider. So bringing in LinkedIn, Google, Apple, and it gets even more complex if we think about B2B customers, bringing in Azure Active Directories, Ping identities, Oktas, everything that exists in the workforce space, because then you have to do one federation per customer, and you can't just do one simple Google or one simple Apple integration. Then let's move on to modernizing the app, giving the users a modern experience. How can you enable passwordless authentication? So getting rid of the password we just made sure they can reset and get access to, because many of your customers do want that, and depending on the demographics you target, it can even be a requirement from those customers. Then it's about, now we've built the front end, how can we make all of this talk of our backend service? So how can we implement the right protocols? It's about how can we manage roles of that user? So exactly the second part of what is a user actually allowed to do in my application? How do we develop all of that? And you see, it gets more and more and more on top of just this username and password. And what I described here is just hitting the minimum requirement, making an experience that makes users go, or not make users go, that's a bad experience, but without exciting them yet. And we actually did the math. Building an application yourself, and this is just a survey we did with some of our customers who chose to use Auth0, can take you 80 to 200 work days per app you want to secure. So this is just one application we're talking about, which is 4 to 10 months, and that doesn't include maintenance, and it doesn't include multiple applications. What happens with single sign-on? What happens with duplicating or managing access to multiple apps at once? And of course, not every of those apps will then take you 80 days, but it's certainly a lot more than using a managed service, and then a lot more than most of developers estimate when they start this project. So I just want to take a few minutes to show you now, how does that look like in action with Auth0? How would you do that if you would start with a managed service like Auth0? And to do so, I chose a demo example that we have around TravelZero. TravelZero is a travel agency. They book travels for consumers. They also have a corporate website where the business companies can do their business travel through. And we want to help TravelZero to build a better user experience. So the first thing they will do is they will sign up to auth0.com. The moment you do that, you have your Auth0 instance. We're cloud native, so you don't have to set up anything. You don't have to spend time thinking about where does this whole thing run. It just works for you. And then they can go into Auth0. They can register their application with us. So to click on this little field here, they can say, I want to build my Auth0 app. In this Auth0 app, they can then choose what type of app they want to build. This is just because we want to make it as easy for them to get started quickly. So in their case, maybe they have a front and backend app, so something running on .NET, Java, Node.js. And when they create that, we automatically prompt them with quick start tutorials. So in fact, we have over 65 quick start tutorials just to make it as easy as possible for customers to get started. We click on this Node.js quick start, we click on integrate now, we get prompted with a few settings that our customers have to make. And then just to zoom in here, and I don't want to get technical, but we even give them the exact piece of code they have to copy into their app, which has all the information that's specific to them already in there. So developers don't even have to understand what is a client ID, what is an issuer, because we give them all of this information out of the box. And once they did that, and we go back to Auth0 and click on login, they already have a managed login experience. So we have an email address in here. We have social logins in here. We have all this managed. If I go now and click on login, it will automatically check, okay, this is an existing account. So let's ask that user for a password and not to sign up in the first place. Let's give them a forget password option. And in fact, your user login can be hosted by Auth0. So you could even customize this experience by going into Auth0, and we have this little branding section here. We call this feature Universal Login. And you could say, my login page shouldn't look that generic. I want something special. So you click on Customize Login Page, and you have full code control. So you can give us any website code, and we will run it for you as a login within our SLAs. So you don't have to worry about, will my login be available? How does it work? And now, as we refresh this page, which unfortunately still has my login cached, so let's try this again, we see it looks way more like our brand, but still managed by Auth0. You don't have to care about how does this thing work under the hoods, and how will the security part of it run. And you also see one thing stayed the same, which was this little white login box. And again, this is something which every application has to build. So we just want to make it as easy as possible for you. This little login box contains every single interaction that a user could make with their login provider. So if you want to do multi-factor authentication, it's in there. If you want to do consent management, it's in there. And you can embed this little box into every single application and every single website you have, no matter where it's hosted. So you don't have to care about how will I get the information from this website back to my application? How can I secure this process? All of this is already included just in the basic login experience. So all that we showed before is managed by registering an application, customizing everything around your login, and then just using what's there out of the box. So this makes it extremely easy for you to get started. But we're not done yet. This is just the bare minimum. If we think about bringing in users to our application, so we talked about social logins and their impact on user sign up. We can go to social connections in Auth0, and we can just toggle on Apple, Facebook, Google. In fact, we have over 45 of those pre-built integrations, and you can integrate any provider that follows standard protocols. And in fact, we don't even, we even gather additional data about the user once they logged in through this method. So we don't just get, okay, the user can now sign in with Google, but you get information from Google if a user chooses to sign in like that, which again makes it a lot more easier for you to gather data without prompting the user and nagging them for info. And the story gets even more compelling when we go to enterprise login. So let's switch the scenario real quick from our user login or customer login to our corporate login, where we have different identity providers that the company uses internally, like Microsoft's products, for example, and we can register all of them within Auth0, again, by just filling out some standard text, so to say, some standard settings that we have to take. And once we did that, we can go to our corporate website. We have a similar experience like you just seen before, but if we now go and sign in with a company user, Auth0 automatically even checks, okay, this user is a enterprise user that I already know, so let's not prompt them for a password. Let's just give them this prompt, single sign-on is enabled, and once they click login, they get redirected to their own login, so to the login box which they would use to log into their company account, and they don't have to create another one for Auth0. So this is all about the management, again, out of the box that a managed tool gives you. And these are all cases that you don't have to start building yourself because it's already in the tool. And then just to finish it off, just to give you an idea on what would come next now that we have all these baselines that we mentioned before, there are features like security. So that you can, for example, do multi-factor authentication out of the box. You could let users sign in through push notifications, through emails and phones, even through the Windows Hello or Apple Touch ID, which can greatly increase user adoption and reduce friction with login. You have out-of-the-box security measures. So by using a managed solution, you will automatically have protection against brute force attacks, bot attacks, and a lot of other security risks you have. And that's something I don't want to go into too much detail because this is then really where your main effort should go. So that's then the part where you should invest time after you've built all those basics, is how can we extend our identity platform? Because identity is not a silo. Identity is part of your whole application. And with Auth0, for example, you can say, whenever a user signs in, create a new contact in Salesforce, start an email campaign for that user, check what parts of my app this user wants to access, and do multi-factor authentication depending on that. And in fact, you can write any rule. So all of this can be coded by yourself on top of Auth0, but integrated into our platform to give your users the experience you want and to give you the flexibility to do whatever you want with your identity system. In a nutshell, so that you can focus on making your tool work for your domain and for your app without having to worry about how can users in the first place access my application. And this is basically the reasoning behind why you should use a managed tool. But now we can switch back to tier 2, who can actually show you how did that work out for a specific customer we already had. So over to you again.
Thanks, Tobias. I'm just going to change presenter here, and hopefully you will be seeing my screen very soon. There we go. Okay. So thanks again, Tobias. So I'm Andy Kennedy. I'm a director at Tier 2, and I'm just going to spend a little bit of time stepping through an example of how Auth0 was used to provide multi-factor authentication very quickly and very cost effectively for a biotech startup. So we're only really going to step through one quite limited aspect of Auth0 capability, but I think it's a good example of what we've been trying to get across today. It's about the value of effectively buying this type as opposed to building it. So let me just step on to the next screen if I can here. A little bit of background actually before I do. So just PredictImmune, they are a global biotech company. They're a startup around 3 years or so ago. And the technology really is a result of a lot of research that was done in and around University of Cambridge. And it's all about guiding personalized treatment of patients with immune-mediated diseases. So I'll give you a little bit more background on that in a minute. But the application we're going to talk about is effectively the foundation of their business. They call it PredictSure, and it is a prognostic test for guiding treatment options in inflammatory bowel disease. So it doesn't sound very, very exciting in that sense, but of course it's very important for clinicians and ultimately the patients. The idea really is just by using a very small blood sample and some algorithms and so on that work against that blood sample, PredictImmune can tell clinicians and doctors and so on what the likely course of a treatment would be. The idea being to differentiate between aggressive and milder forms of the disease. So we were chosen, Tier 2 was chosen to help them build the web portal aspect of this, because we have a lot of experience of developing custom software within a regulated environment. Steve, whenever he was giving an overview of Tier 2, talked a little bit about the approach that we use, which is generally agile, based on Scrum, but we have experience of adapting that for use within regulated environments as well. And in the case of PredictImmune, it's particularly important because ultimately we needed to work under an ISO 13485, which is a medical device standard. So obviously, as you would expect, we're going to talk a little bit about security. That was one of the key technical design aspects for this. A number of aspects were required for them, everything from critical web applications to security, to what I'm going to talk a little bit more about now, which is really the multi-factor authentication aspects of that. As I said, it's very, very important, particularly important because we're working in this regulated environment. So one key requirement, functional requirement for them, was for clinicians, doctors and so on, to actually get access to clinical reports. So effectively, if you like, the treatment options, the outcome of the tests. And as you would imagine, these reports contain very, very sensitive information. So Tobias talked about a number of aspects there, and I'm just going to touch in this session a little bit about multi-factor authentication, because we chose a very particular approach to that. Step one, and as you'll see, it's pretty standard. We're all sort of digital natives now. We'll be very familiar with this type of approach. But what we did to start with was generate effectively a secure email link. So for example, once a test result was available and a report was available, then an email is automatically sent to the clinician that actually requested that report in the first place. And that email includes secure URL. It's sitting in behind the access results button in there. And that was generated just quite simply, technically, with a JSON web token in there. So starting point, again, very standard stuff, an email to notify the clinician that results are actually available. And as I say, with this sort of secure email link to start with. So then after that, once the clinician has clicked on that, again, you'll be very, very familiar with this. They received an SMS message, and this is providing a sort of a one-time password type code. Now, this was done through the Auth0 passwordless SMS API. And again, once the clinician has received that, and you see they type that code into the sort of verification box, again, all sort of standard functionality that we built for them within there. And the system in behind the scene then verifies that code, again, by making an Auth0 call. So it's an Auth0 token API call. And if, of course, successful, then it allows the clinician to actually receive the report. So it's pretty standard functionality there, as you can see. Relatively simple. It's a relatively small part of the overall system functionality. But because of this type of use case, because of a regulated industry and the level of security that's sitting around the outside of that, this is an ideal candidate for this type of drop-in solution. It's an ideal candidate to build it rather than buy it. So it's a sort of a use case. It's a process that we're all very familiar with, but you get the idea as to why it's quite important in this particular case. So just moving on, just to sort of summarize a little bit on this, and this is really getting back in line with the whole essence of this webinar. It's all about, well, why would you go to the effort? And, Tobias shared some numbers there earlier about developing this, when actually, in fact, it might be much more easy and much more cost effective to deliver or to buy this type of drop-in service. PredictImmune was a biotech startup, as we talked about earlier. It's very, very tightly managed funding, again, as most startups are. and developing multi-factor authentication capabilities, developing that was never going to be an option for them. The alternative for them would have been either to create a platform without the ability to provide clinicians with that secure access to report. But in truth, that would have significantly weakened, if not really destroyed, the whole business proposition. So I think that sort of demonstrates the importance there. I'll put a number up there. The development effort required from Tier 2 to integrate with Auth0 to provide this type of multi-factor authentication was only 3 days, and that's in stark contrast to some of the numbers that that Tobias was sharing a little earlier. We do have a blog post which talks in a lot more detail about this particular case study. We'll share that blog post in a follow-up email. But as I say, just for the minute, I just wanted to leave it there. It was only just a very simple example to give you the essence of why we think that there are certain cases here where it's very important that you consider this sort of drop-in approach to using a pre-developed service as opposed to developing it yourself. So at this point then, I'm going to hand back to Steve, Steve, I think you're going to just wrap things up a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
Back. Okay.
So we have a few minutes. I'll open the floor up for some questions if there are any. No? Cool. Okay. If you do have any questions following on from the presentation, please send them over and we'll come back to you with the answers. So let me ask you this. Are you at a point in your project where you need to implement authentication? Is your current authentication approach maintainable, or have you encountered difficulties when setting up authentication? Delivering authentication in-house can be tough. So with Auth0's IDaaS solution, this makes the process quicker, easier, and a lot more cost-effective, and avoids the risk that comes with building your own service. So Tier 2 and Auth0 will be there from the beginning to the end to help design, deliver, and support the IDaaS solution that you choose. There is a free trial available. You'll see on screen now that there are some of the features that are involved within the trial. There's only a couple of things from the actual full version that aren't there, but the majority of what you would need to get this up and running and have a good play around with it is all included with the free trial. So if you need anything, please contact us or reach out to us on one of our social channels. As Andy said, we'll follow up in the coming days with the presentation, the link to the video, and the case study that Andy ran through. So once again, just like to thank you again for your time this morning, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon. Thank you.